I want you to do something for me right now. It's the simplest thing in the world. Just take a breath. In and out. It feels like nothing, right? It's automatic. It's effortless. You're checking your email. You're driving. You're making coffee. And this rhythm just, happens in the background.
Which is exactly how it's designed to feel. But if you were to peel back the layers of skin and muscle and actually look at the engineering required to make that effortless moment happen, it is genuinely terrifying.
Terrifying.
Oh, yeah. Terrifying because it is a mechanical high-wire act.
Right.
You have these delicate tissues, we're talking microns thick, that have to be soft enough to stretch and accept air, but at the same time, strong enough not to collapse under pressure.
Okay, that's a tough balance.
It is. And they have to expose a surface area the size of a tennis court to the outside world. So you're effectively inviting in every bacteria and dust particle in the room while somehow keeping the blood supply completely sterile.
And if any part of that tension breaks, if it's too stiff or too floppy or, too wet, the whole system shuts down.
The whole thing fails. It's a system living on the razor's edge of disaster every single minute of your life.
Well, that is the cheery note we are starting on today. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at the lungs. But not the, breathe in, breathe out nursery school version.
No.
We are looking at the machinery. We are stripping the engine down to the block.
We're going to look at the structural engineering and the fluid dynamics that keep you alive.
And to do that, we are synthesizing two absolute titans of medical literature. We are pulling from Ganong's review of medical physiology, specifically the chapter on pulmonary structure, and Guyton Hall textbook of medical physiology, the chapter on pulmonary ventilation.
It's a great pairing. You really, really need both to get the full picture.
How do you distinguish them? I mean, they're both physiology books. What's the flavor of each?
I think of Ganong as the architect. It gives us the blueprints. It's obsessed with the cellular structure, the neural wiring, the what and the how, the anatomy. It builds the house.
Okay. And Guyton?
Guyton is the engineer. He's obsessed with the pressures, the flow rates, the fluid dynamics. He provides the quantitative why.
The why?
Yeah. Why does blood flow to the bottom of the lung and not the top? Why doesn't fluid leak into the air sacs? Guyton brings the math, the physics.
So today we're mashing up the architect and the engineer. Now, quick disclaimer before we launch. This is a deep dive, but it is a conceptual map. We are synthesizing these complex texts to give you the big picture, the mental models. If you are a medical student preparing for boards, you still need to open the book and memorize the specific numbers.
Absolutely. Consider this the guide that helps the textbook make sense. We want to give you the scaffolding so that when you read about compliance or surface tension, you have a real-world anchor for it.
Right, a framework. So reading through these chapters, I picked up on a few recurring themes. It feels like the lungs are constantly trying to solve a few paradoxes.
That's a really good way to put it, yes.
The first one is this idea of structure yielding without collapsing.
Which is so much harder than it sounds. You need something that is incredibly compliant stretchy. But if it's too stretchy, it's useless. It's just a floppy bag.
Right. Then there's regulation versus capacity. The lung has to handle these massive volumes of air, but it also has to micromanage exactly where that air goes.
It's not a passive balloon. I think that's the biggest misconception people have.
See more about that.
The lung is an active engineered machine. It makes decisions. It routes air and blood. It cleans itself. It's a smart organ.
Okay, so let's start with the build. The architecture of air, as Ganong lays it out. When I look at the diagram of the airways, it doesn't look like a bag. It looks like a tree.
It is a tree, just upside down. It starts with the trunk, the trachea, and then it splits. We call this dichotomous branching.
Dichotomous meaning it always splits into two.
Always two. One airway becomes two, those two become 4, 16, 32, and so on.
It's fractal.
It is. And it does this splitting process roughly 23 times. We call them generations. From the trachea at generation 0 all the way down to the alveolar sacs at generation 23.
But not all generations are created equal, are they? There's a distinct border crossing that happens partway down.
A very, very heavily guarded border. The first 16 generations, so from the trachea down through the bronchi and into the terminal bronchioles, this is strictly the conducting zone.
Conducting zone, meaning?
Meaning its only job is transport. It's the highway. It's the plumbing to get the air from the outside world down to where the action is.
So no gas exchange.
Absolutely zero gas exchange happens here. Oxygen cannot get into the blood from these tubes. The walls are just too thick.
So, physiologically speaking, the air sitting in my windpipe right now is useless.
We call it anatomic dead space. It's about 150 milliliters of air that is just waiting in line. It's the commute before you get to work.
Why do we have so much dead space? I mean, nature is usually efficient. Why build a system where you have to move 150 milliliters of air that does nothing just to get to the good stuff?
It seems like a waste, doesn't it? But think about what that air is doing while it's in the dead space. The outside air is cold, it's dry, and it's dirty. If you dump that directly onto the delicate tissue of the alveoli, you destroy them. You'd get inflammation, infection, you dry them out.
So the conducting zone is, what, it's conditioning the air?
It's an HVAC system,
Yeah.
a brilliant one. By the time air reaches the bottom of that 16th generation, it has been warmed to body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. It's been humidified to 100% saturation, and it's been filtered of most dust and pathogens.
So that dead space is actually a protective buffer. It's the cost of doing business safely.
Exactly. It's an insurance policy.
Talk to me about the structure of these tubes, because Ganem points out a really interesting shift in materials as we go down.
Right. In the trachea and the big bronchi, so the top of the tree, you have these C-shaped rings of cartilage. They're rigid.
Why do we need rigid pipes there? Why not just a soft tube?
Because of the pressure. When you inhale, you create a vacuum in your chest. If your windpipe were just a soft hose, that vacuum would suck it shut.
Like trying to drink a thick milkshake through a wet paper straw.
That's the perfect image. It would just collapse on itself. You need the cartilage to hold the tunnel open against that negative pressure.
Like the structural steel in a mine shaft.
Exactly. But as you go deeper, generation by generation, the cartilage starts to disappear, it breaks up into little plates, and then it's gone. By the time you get to the bronchioles, there is no cartilage at all.
And what replaces it?
Smooth muscle. The walls become almost entirely composed of smooth muscle wrapped around the airway.
And this is a key trade-off, isn't it? Cartilage is safe, but it's fixed. Smooth muscle is riskier.
Smooth muscle is controllable. This is where the lung becomes smart. Because you have muscle wrapped around these airways, your autonomic nervous system can decide to squeeze them shut or relax them open.
And this is where asthma lives.
Precisely. Asthma is a disease of the bronchioles. The smooth muscle gets hyperresponsive. It spasms and constricts. Since there is no cartilage to prop it open, the airway can clamp shut completely.
Okay, so we travel down the highway, past the smooth muscle checkpoints, and we hit generation 17, the border, the respiratory zone.
Now we are in the business end. We go from terminal bronchioles to respiratory bronchioles, then alveolar ducts, and finally into the clusters of grapes at the end, the alveolar sacs.
And the geometry changes completely here. It's not a pipe anymore.
It explodes. The whole system just blossoms.
Yeah.
If you look at the cross-sectional area of the trachea, it's about 2.5 square centimeters.
About the size of a quarter.
Right. But because of that dichotomous branching tube becoming 8, all the way up to millions of tiny airways, by the time you get to the alveoli, the total surface area is 11,800 square centimeters.
It goes from a quarter to a tennis court.
About 70 square meters. And this is the architecture of air concept. The lung is designed to take a small volume of air and spread it out over a massive, massive surface area to maximize the opportunity for gas exchange.
And the barrier, the wall between that air and the blood, how thick is it?
It is vanishingly thin. Ganong puts it at about 0.5 microns. Some places it's even less, maybe 0.2.
I can't even visualize 0.5 microns.
A single red blood cell is about 7 microns in diameter. So the barrier is more than 10 times thinner than a red blood cell. A sheet of paper is about 100 microns thick. So we're talking about a barrier 200 times thinner than a sheet of paper.
That is wild, just mind-bogglingly thin.
It has to be. Oxygen isn't pumped into the blood by a machine. It relies on passive diffusion. It just floats across. If that wall were any thicker, diffusion would be too slow and you would suffocate, even with lungs full of air.
But this brings me back to the terrifying part. You have a warm, wet tennis court inside your body, covered by a barrier thinner than a soap bubble, open to the outside world. That sounds like a bacterial paradise.
It would be.
How are we not constantly dying of pneumonia?
Because of the cleaning crew. Gannon describes this cellular defense system that is just as complex and elegant as the structural one.
Is this the mucociliary escalator? I've heard that term.
It is, and it is literal. In that conducting zone we talk about, the airways are lined with a special kind of cell, pseudostratified epithelium, that has cilia-tiny, hair-like fingers. And these cilia aren't just waving around randomly. They are beating in a coordinated rhythm, like rowers in a boat, about 10 to 15 times per second.
That's fast.
It's a blur, and they're all beating the same direction, up, toward the throat.
And they're carrying something.
Right. Sitting on top of these cilia is a two-layer blanket. The bottom layer is a watery fluid, the sol layer, or paraciliary fluid. The cilia beat in this fluid so they can move freely. The top layer is the sticky mucus, the gel layer, produced by goblet cells.
The flypaper.
Exactly. Dust, pollen, bacteria, anything between about 2 and 5 microns in size gets stuck in that sticky mucus. The cilia beat underneath, and the whole sheet of mucus slides up the airway.
Like a conveyor belt.
A conveyor belt of sludge moving out of your lungs at about 16 millimeters per minute. Eventually, it gets to your pharynx, and you swallow it without even noticing. Your stomach acid takes care of the rest.
It's brilliant engineering, but it sounds like it relies on a very delicate balance.
Extremely delicate. The mucus has to be sticky enough to trap bacteria, but wet enough to slide. The paraciliary fluid has to be the right depth. If it's too shallow, the cilia get crushed. If it's too deep, they can't reach the mucus to push it.
And this is where Ganong brings in the clinical nightmare. Cystic fibrosis. I remember reading about this, but I never connected it to the physics of the fluid.
It's a physics failure caused by a chemistry error. A single gene.
Walk us through that. What's the gene?
It's the CFTR gene. It codes for a chloride channel. In a normal lung, these channels pump chloride ions out of the epithelial cells and into the airway.
Okay, so salt goes into the airway.
Right. And water follows salt by osmosis. That's how the body hydrates that paraciliary fluid layer. It keeps the sol layer nice and watery.
It lubricates the conveyor belt.
Perfect way to put it. In cystic fibrosis, you have a mutation, usually the delta F508 mutation, that breaks this chloride channel. It gets misfolded and stuck inside the cell.
So the chloride can't get out.
The chloride is trapped inside the cells, so the water stays inside the cells too. It doesn't move into the airway.
The airway dries out.
The conveyor belt loses its lubrication.
Right.
The paraciliary layer collapses. The mucus becomes incredibly thick, dehydrated, and sticky. It's like trying to move drying concrete instead of sludge.
And the cilia.
The cilia get crushed under the weight. They can't beat. The escalator stops.
So all that junk just sits there.
It sits there. And all that bacteria, all that dust, it just festers. It creates this perfect breeding ground for chronic destructive infections, especially Pseudomonas aeruginosa. The cleaning crew is on strike because the machinery is gummed up.
It really highlights that the lung isn't just a static bag. It's an active defense system.
And that defense system changes as you go deeper. When you get to the respiratory zone, the goblet cells disappear.
Why is that?
You can't have mucus down in the gas exchange zone. It would block the oxygen from getting across that thin barrier.
So the cells change.
They do. In the bronchioles, the goblet cells are replaced by club cells, which used to be called Clara cells. They secrete a watery substance and also act as stem cells for repair.
And then in the alveoli themselves.
Down on the tennis court, you have two main cell types. Type I pneumocytes are these huge, flat, pancake-like cells. They cover 95% of the surface area, but they're only a tiny fraction of the total cell number. They're built for one thing, being thin.
Vertex diffusion.
Exactly. Then you have the type 2 pneumocytes. They're more granular, thicker, and they only cover about 5% of the surface area. But they make up 60% of the cells.
So they must be doing something important.
They're the caretakers. They produce surfactant, which we'll get to in a minute. And they can also divide and differentiate to replace damaged type I cells. They're the repair crew.
So who guards the tennis court if there's no mucus? What's the last line of defense?
The alveolar macrophages, the PAMAMs, pulmonary alveolar macrophages. There are these amoeba-like cells that roam the surface of the alveoli, like little Roombas, hunting for anything that made it past the escalator.
They just eat the dust.
They ingest it, phagocytose it, and then digest it with enzymes. Or they carry it back up to the escalator. They are the bouncers.
But I'm guessing they have their limits.
Absolutely. Ganong makes a point that they're easily overwhelmed by things like cigarette smoke or silica dust. If they eat too much toxic material, they get activated and release inflammatory products, cytokines, proteases, that actually digest the lung tissue itself.
Friendly fire.
Exactly. That's the basis of emphysema. The lung's own defense system, when overwhelmed, starts to destroy the delicate alveolar walls.
Okay, so we've built the structure, we've lined it with defenses, now we need to make it move. We need to talk about the pump.
The mechanics of ventilation.
I think this is where people's intuition is often wrong. We think we suck air in, like sipping a milkshake through a straw.
Right. But that implies you are actively pulling the air. That's not how physics works. Air is lazy. It only moves if it's pushed.
Pushed by what?
Atmospheric pressure. The air outside your body is pressing down with a weight of 760 millimeters of mercury at sea level. All your body has to do is create a space inside your chest that has lower pressure than that.
You create a partial vacuum, and the universe shoves air into your lungs to fill it.
Exactly. You are just manipulating pressure gradients.
Yeah.
And the primary engine for creating that vacuum is the diaphragm.
Gannon gives the diaphragm credit for, what, 75% of the work in quiet breathing?
In quiet breathing, yes. It's the MVP. It's this huge dome-shaped muscle that sits between your chest and your belly. When it contracts, it flattens out and moves down like a piston.
How far does it move?
In quiet breathing, maybe 1.5 centimeters. But in a deep, forceful inspiration, it can move as much as 7 centimeters.
So it moves down, which makes the chest cavity bigger from top to bottom.
And Boyle's law kicks in. For a gas at a constant temperature, if you increase the volume, you decrease the pressure. The pressure in your lungs drops from 760 millimeter Hg to maybe 759.
Just 1 millimeter of mercury.
That's all it takes. Air rushes in, down that gradient, until the pressures equalize. Then you relax the diaphragm, it domes back up, volume decreases, pressure increases to 761, and air flows out.
And this muscle is controlled by
a phrenic nerve. It originates from cervical spinal roots C3, C4, and C5. There's a famous medical school mnemonic for it.
C3, 4, 5, keep the diaphragm alive.
That's the one. It's a critical piece of wiring. If you have a high spinal cord injury above C3, you lose control of your diaphragm. You can't breathe on your own.
And what about the other muscles, the 25%?
Those are the accessory muscles. For inspiration, it's mainly the external intercostals. They're the muscles between your ribs.
How do they work?
They lift the rib cage up and out. It's called the bucket handle movement. Imagine the handle on a bucket. As you lift it, it moves outwards. That increases the front to back and side to side diameter of the chest.
And for expiration?
Quiet expiration is passive. You just relax the diaphragm and the external intercostals, and the natural elastic recoil of the lungs does the work.
It's like letting the air out of a balloon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you need to breathe out forcefully, like when you're exercising or coughing, you use your internal intercostals to pull the ribs down and in, and your abdominal muscles to push the diaphragm up.
Now, I want to drill down on something Guyton emphasizes, which is the pleural coupling, because this is another one of those razor's edge things.
Oh, this is absolutely critical. It's the whole reason the pump works.
So the lungs are these soft, spongy tissues. The chest wall is a rigid cage. They aren't glued together. They aren't stapled. There are no screws.
Yep.
Why don't the lungs just shrivel up like a raisin inside the chest?
Because of the pleural fluid. You have two membranes. One sticks to the lung surface, the visceral pleura, and one sticks to the inside of the chest wall, the parietal pleura.
Okay.
Between them is a tiny potential space filled with a microscopic amount of mucoid fluid, just a few milliliters.
Gannon uses the wet glass slides analogy.
It's the classic teaching example because it works perfectly. Imagine two glass microscope slides with a drop of water between them. You can slide them back and forth easily. There's very little friction. That's lubrication, allowing the lungs to move smoothly during breathing. But now, try to pull them apart. Try to lift the top slide straight up off the bottom one.
You can't. They're stuck.
That's surface tension. The water holds them together. The lung is the top slide. The chest wall is the bottom slide. When the chest wall expands, the lung has to go with it because of that fluid linkage.
But there's a force trying to pull them apart, right? You mentioned the lung is elastic.
Yes. This is the key tension. The lung tissue contains elastin and collagen fibers, so it has a natural tendency to recoil inward to collapse. At the same time, the chest wall is springy. It actually wants to bounce outward.
So they are constantly pulling away from each other.
They are in a constant tug of war. And that tug of war creates a negative pressure in the fluid between them. It creates a vacuum.
We call that intrapleural pressure.
Correct. At rest, at the end of a normal exhalation, it's about -2.5 millimillion Hg, or -5 centimeters of water. When you inspire and the chest wall pulls out even more, that vacuum gets stronger, dropping to about -6 millimillion Hg. That's what actually pulls the lung open.
But here's the question Guyton answers that I never thought to ask. If there's a vacuum in that space, why doesn't fluid from the surrounding body tissues just get sucked into it and fill it up? Nature abhors a vacuum, right?
That is a fantastic question. It's a brilliant insight from Guyton.
Yeah.
And the answer is the lymphatic system.
The lymphatics.
Yes, you have lymphatic pumps embedded in the parietal pleura, the lining of the chest wall. They're constantly sucking any excess fluid out of that pleural space.
They're a sump pump.
They're a sump pump maintaining the vacuum. They're essentially bailing out the boat 24/7 to keep that space dry and under negative pressure.
So if that pump fails?
Or if it gets blocked, say by a tumor, Or if the pressure in the capillaries gets too high and fluid leaks in faster than the lymphatics can remove it, then fluid fills the space. That's a pleural effusion.
And the glue breaks. The slide's separate.
And the lung collapses. It's called the pneumothorax if air gets in, or just atelectasis from the fluid pressure. The coupling is lost.
Wow, it really is an engineered system, a dynamic one. It's not just anatomy, it's active pumping.
Constantly.
Let's move to the concept that I found the most mind-bending in this entire deep dive. Compliance, elasticity, and the miracle of surfactant.
This is the heart of pulmonary mechanics. This explains so much about lung disease.
So compliance is just a fancy word for stretchiness, right?
Roughly, yes. The technical definition is the change in volume per unit change in pressure. So delta V over delta P.
Okay.
If a lung has high compliance, it's like a thin party balloon. You blow a little, it expands a lot. If it has low compliance, it's like a thick rubber tire. You push and push with a lot of pressure, and it barely moves. It's stiff.
And a healthy lung has a compliance of, what's the number?
For the lungs and thorax together, it's about 0.1 LC-media H2O. For the lungs alone, it's about 0.2 LC-media H2O.
So ideally, we want high compliance, we want easy breathing.
We do. But the lung has a natural enemy to compliance: surface tension. And this leads us to the classic saline versus air experiment.
This is figure 3412 in Ganong. It's a famous graph.
It's a foundational experiment. They took a lung out of a body. First, they filled it with air and measured the pressure it took to inflate and deflate it. Then, they rinsed it out and filled it with saline salt water.
And what was the difference?
When it was filled with water, it was incredibly easy to inflate. The compliance was huge. It took almost no pressure to open it up.
Why? That seems backward. Water is heavy.
Because when the lung is filled with water, there is no air-water interface inside the alveoli. There is only water against water, so there is no surface tension.
But when it's filled with air?
You have a thin layer of fluid lining the alveolus, and then air in the middle. Water molecules are polar. They love other water molecules. They want to clump together. So the water lining the alveolus is constantly trying to bead up, like water on a waxed car.
Which pulls the walls of the alveolus inward.
Exactly. It's a powerful force that is constantly trying to collapse the balloon. This surface tension force is massive. It accounts for about 2/3 of the elastic recoil of the lung, the work you do when you breathe.
2/3. So most of the effort of breathing is just fighting the water in my own lungs.
Yes. And the graph shows something else really important: hysteresis.
Hysteresis. What's that?
It means the inflation curve and the deflation curve are not the same. It takes more pressure to open the lung up than it does to keep it open on the way down. That gap between the curves is entirely due to surface tension. When you fill it with saline, the gap disappears. The curves are identical.
So that's the proof. But it gets worse, right? Because of the law of physics called the law of Laplace.
Yes. This is where it gets really counterintuitive and really dangerous for the lung.
Okay, lay it on us. I know this is tricky.
The law of Laplace says that for a sphere like an alveolus, the collapsing pressure inside it equals 2 times the surface tension divided by the radius. So P equals 2T over R.
P equals 2TR. Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It means the collapsing pressure depends on the size. Let's assume for a second that the surface tension T of the water is constant. If the radius of the alveolus gets smaller, what happens to the pressure P?
If R is on the bottom of the fraction and it gets smaller, the pressure must go up a lot.
Exactly. This is the soap bubble paradox. It is much harder to start blowing up a small bubble than to keep a large one inflated. The smaller the bubble, the higher the collapsing pressure inside it.
So wait, as I exhale, my alveoli shrink. The radius gets smaller.
Right.
According to Laplace's law, that means the collapsing pressure should skyrocket. My lungs should snap shut at the end of every breath and be almost impossible to reopen.
Correct. And even worse, since your lungs have millions of different size alveoli all connected to each other, the small ones would have much higher pressure than the big ones.
So the air would.
The air would flow from the small high-pressure alveoli into the large low-pressure ones. The small ones would collapse completely, and the big ones would overinflate and pop.
My lungs would be a mess of popped balloons and shriveled raisins. It's called atelectasis.
But they aren't.
Because of the hero of our story, surfactant.
Surfactant. It is a magical detergent produced by those type 2 alveolar cells we mentioned earlier. It's a mixture of phospholipids, mostly DPPC, and some special proteins.
How does it fix the Laplace problem?
It reduces surface tension to T. But here's the genius part. It does it dynamically. It's not a constant effect.
What do you mean?
Surfactant molecules are amphipathic, meaning they have a water-loving head and a water-hating tail. They arrange themselves on the surface of the fluid layer with their tails sticking up into the air. This disrupts the attraction between water molecules.
Okay.
Now, when the alveolus is large and stretched out on inspiration, those surfactant molecules are spread far apart. They don't have much effect. But when the alveolus shrinks when you exhale, those surfactant molecules get crowded together. They become more concentrated.
So as the radius gets smaller, the surfactant gets stronger.
Exactly. It reduces the tension T drastically right when the radius R is getting small.
So in the equation P equals 2TR, as R goes down, T also goes down.
Which keeps the pressure P stable across alveoli of all sizes. It neutralizes the law of Laplace. It stabilizes the small alveoli so they can exist next to big ones without collapsing into them.
That is incredibly elegant.
It's the only reason we can breathe efficiently.
Yeah.
And we know this because of what happens when we don't have it. Guénon talks about IRDS, infant respiratory distress syndrome.
This happens in premature babies, right?
Yes. Types 2 cells don't start making mature surfactant until late in gestation, maybe 34 or 35 weeks. If a baby is born too early, their lungs are stiff. They have very low compliance because of the unopposed surface tension.
So every breath is a battle.
Every single breath is like blowing up a brand new stiff balloon for the first time. They have to generate huge negative pressures just to open their lungs, and the lungs collapse completely at the end of each breath. They exhaust themselves just trying to breathe.
And you mentioned it causes fluid leakage.
Yes. Guyton points out that the high surface tension creates a powerful inward pulling force, about 20 millennial Hg, that literally sucks fluid out of the blood capillaries and floods the lungs. Pulmonary edema.
So the treatment is?
We can now give these babies artificial surfactant squirted right into their lungs. It's one of the great success stories of modern neonatology.
Okay, so we've kept the lungs open. Now let's talk about moving air through them. We need to talk about airway resistance and flow.
The plumbing dynamics.
Logic tells me that the smallest tubes, the terminal bronchioles, should have the highest resistance. It's harder to drink through a coffee stirrer than a boba straw.
That is the intuition. It's based on Plazoi's law, where resistance is inversely proportional to the radius to the fourth power. So a tiny change in radius should have a massive effect.
But the lung defies it.
It does. The highest resistance is actually in the medium-sized bronchi, around generations 3 to 5. It's the parallel circuit concept. Yes, one single terminal bronchiole is tiny and has high resistance, but you don't have one. You have hundreds of thousands of them arranged in parallel.
Like having thousands of coffee stirrers side by side.
Exactly. The total cross-sectional area of all the small airways combined is massive. It's like a rushing river dumping into a wide, slow-moving delta. The water slows down and spreads out. The bottleneck, the resistance, is actually upstream in the medium-sized rivers where the flow is fastest.
And Guyton points out that this is convenient because that's where the smooth muscle is.
Exactly. Since the major site of resistance is in the muscular airways, the body can actively control it.
We can regulate flow.
We can dial it up or down. If you're running from a tiger, the sympathetic nervous system releases epinephrine. It hits beta-2 adrenergic receptors on that smooth muscle.
And the airways dilate.
Bronchodilation. Resistance plummets. Airflow maximizes.
But if you inhale smoke or dust, or you have a parasympathetic response?
The parasympathetic system kicks in, releases acetylcholine. It causes bronchoconstriction to try and keep the bad stuff out. Things like cool air and irritants can also trigger this.
Or, in the case of disease, this regulation goes haywire.
Right. And we can measure this. Let's talk about the engine check. Spirometry. This is how we diagnose if the flow is wrong.
We measure volumes. Tidal volume, the normal breath, is about 500 millil. Residual volume is the air you can never exhale, about 1.3 L, that keeps the airways open.
Right. And vital capacity is the total usable air.
But the most important thing Guénon highlights isn't just how much air, but how fast.
The FEV1-FVC ratio. This is the gold standard for distinguishing between different types of lung disease.
Write down the acronyms.
FVC is forced vital capacity. Imagine I tell you to take the biggest breath of your life, fill your lungs completely, and then blow it all out as hard and as fast as you can until you're completely empty. That total amount you blow out is the FVC.
And FEV1.
FEV1 is the forced expiratory volume in 1 second. It's how much of that total FVC came out in the very first second of the blast.
A healthy person can get most of it out immediately, right?
A healthy person can get about 80% of their air out in the first second. So the FEV1-FEVC ratio should be 0.8 or higher.
So let's use this to look at the two big categories of lung disease Guénon mentions: obstructive and restrictive?
This is a classic board question. Think of obstructive disease like asthma or COPD. The problem is resistance. The airways are narrow. It's like trying to breathe out through a straw.
So I can get the air in eventually,
Yeah.
but getting it out is the problem.
Exactly. Your total lung capacity, FDC, might be normal or even increased because of air traffic. You have the air, but you can't get it out fast. The resistance is too high. So your FEV1, that first-second blast, is tiny.
So the numerator of the ratio is small, but the denominator is normal. The ratio drops.
It plummets. It might be less than 70%, sometimes down to 50% or 40%.
Now contrast that with restrictive disease like pulmonary fibrosis or sarcoidosis.
In fibrosis, the lung tissue itself becomes scarred and stiff. The compliance is very low. It's the thick rubber tire again.
So I can't get much air in. My lungs won't stretch.
Right. Your total tank size, FEC, is small. The denominator of the ratio is reduced. But your airways are wide open. There's no obstruction. In fact, the scarring can sometimes pull the airways open even wider.
So what little air you have, you can push out lightning fast.
Precisely. Your FEV1 is low because you didn't have much air to begin with. Your FEC is also low.
But the ratio.
The ratio of the two stays normal, around 80%, or can even be higher. You empty the small tank instantly.
That's a crucial distinction. It tells you whether the problem is the plumbing obstructive or the tank itself is restrictive.
Exactly. It's fundamental bedside reasoning.
Let's shift gears. We've spent a lot of time on air, but the lung is a meeting place. It's where air meets blood. We need to talk about the pulmonary circulation.
Guyton is fascinating here.
Yeah.
He emphasizes that the lung actually has two separate blood supplies, a dual circulation.
The bronchial and the pulmonary.
Right. The bronchial circulation is small. It's part of the systemic circulation.
Yeah.
It comes from the aorta, carries oxygenated blood to the lung tissue itself, the bronchi, the connective tissue, because lung cells need to eat too.
It's just the maintenance crew's food supply.
Exactly. High pressure, low flow. But the pulmonary circulation, that's the main event. That's the entire cardiac output from the right side of the heart going to the alveoli to get oxygenated.
And here's the headline. It is a low-pressure, high-flow system.
A very low-pressure system.
Give me the numbers.
Systemic arterial pressure, the pressure in your arm, is about 120 over 80 millimilli Hg. The mean is around 93. Pulmonary arterial pressure is about 25 over 8 millimilli Hg.
That is shockingly low. The mean pressure is only like 15 millimilli Hg.
It has to be. Guyton explains this beautifully. The right ventricle is pumping the exact same amount of blood as the left ventricle, 5 liters per minute at rest. But it's doing it at 1/6 the pressure.
Why? Why not just blast it through?
Because the capillaries in the lung are so thin and delicate. Remember that 0.5 micron barrier? If you hit that with 120 millimilli Hg of pressure, you would blow it out. You would force fluid right through the walls and drown the patient in seconds.
So the lung is a high-flow, low-pressure radiator. The vessels have to be built differently.
Exactly. The pulmonary arteries are much thinner walled and more compliant than systemic arteries. They stretch to accept the flow without raising the pressure. The total resistance of the pulmonary circuit is tiny.
But because the pressure is so low, gravity becomes a bully.
Yes. Gravity has a huge effect. This is the waterfall effect, or the zones of the lung.
Guyton divides the lung into zones based on this.
Imagine a column of water or blood standing up. The pressure at the bottom is higher than the pressure at the top because of the weight of the fluid above it.
Hydrostatic pressure.
Right. There's about a 23 millimilli key pressure difference between the very top of the lung and the very bottom, just due to gravity.
So in an upright person, the blood pressure at the base of the lung is much higher than at the apex.
Correct. And this creates different conditions for blood flow because the blood vessel is being squeezed from the outside by the air pressure in the alveoli.
So we have a battle between blood pressure pushing out and alveolar pressure pushing in.
Precisely. This defines the 3 zones. Zone 1 is the top, the apex. Here, the blood pressure might be so low that it's actually weaker than the air pressure in the alveoli.
So the air sac squashes the blood vessel flat.
Exactly. The capillary collapses. There is no blood flow.
That sounds bad.
In a healthy person at rest, zone 1 doesn't really exist. The heart is strong enough to push blood to the top. But if you have low blood pressure, say from a hemorrhage, or if you're on a ventilator with high positive air pressure, zone 1 appears. You have a part of your lung that is ventilated but not perfused. Physiological dead space.
Okay, then zone 2 in the middle of the lung.
This is the flickering zone, the waterfall. Here, the systolic blood pressure, when the heart beats, is higher than alveolar pressure, so blood flows. But the diastolic pressure, when the heart rests, is lower, so the vessel closes.
So flow is intermittent. It only happens at the peaks.
Right. And zone 3 is at the base of the lung. Here, the blood pressure, both systolic and diastolic, is always higher than the alveolar pressure. The vessels are blown wide open. You have continuous flow.
So practically speaking, when I'm standing here talking to you, the bottom of my lungs is doing most of the work.
Correct. The base of the lung gets the most ventilation and the most perfusion. It is the powerhouse for gas exchange.
Now, what happens when I go for a run? My cardiac output goes up like 5 or 6 times. I'm shoving 25, 30 liters of blood through my lungs every minute. Does the pulmonary pressure spike?
You would think so.
Mm-hmm.
Ohm's law says if flow goes up and resistance is constant, pressure must go up. But in the lung, the pressure barely moves. Maybe goes from a mean of 15 to 20.
How is that possible? Where does all the blood go?
The lung cheats. It dramatically drops its resistance using 2 mechanisms: recruitment and distension.
Explain.
Recruitment means opening up capillaries that were previously closed, like those in zone 2 and the potential zone 1 at the top. Suddenly, the whole lung becomes a zone 3.
So you open more lanes on the highway.
And distension means the vessels that are already open stretch even wider.
So you make the existing lanes wider.
Exactly. Opening more lanes and widening the existing ones causes the total resistance to plummet. This allows the lung to accept that huge volume of blood without raising the pressure, protecting the right heart from strain, and protecting that delicate thin barrier from being damaged.
There is one more regulation trick that I found absolutely backwards compared to the rest of the body. Hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction, or HPV.
This is the smart plumbing feature. It's a fundamental concept.
Usually in the body, if a tissue is low on oxygen, if it's hypoxic, the blood vessels dilate.
Right. If your leg muscle is working hard and becomes hypoxic, the arteries open up to bring more blood, more oxygen, feed the starving tissue.
But in the lung.
It does the exact opposite. If a group of alveoli are hypoxic, say there's a mucus plug and no fresh air is getting in, the small arterioles feeding that region constrict, they clamp shut.
Why? That seems cruel. Oh, you have no oxygen. Oh, well, you get no blood either.
It's not cruel. It's brilliantly efficient. Remember, the lung isn't consuming the oxygen for its own use. It's loading the blood with oxygen for the rest of the body.
Ah, okay.
If you send blood to an alveolus that has no oxygen in it, that blood will just pass through and leave just as deoxygenated as it arrived. It's a wasted trip. It's a shunt.
So the lung diverts traffic away from the broken bridges and sends it to the open ones.
Exactly. It shunts the blood away from poorly ventilated areas and toward the healthy, well-ventilated alveoli. It automatically matches perfusion, Q, to ventilation, V. This is VQ matching, and it's essential for efficient gas exchange.
That is incredibly clever, and it's local.
It's entirely local. The brain isn't doing this. The smooth muscle cells in the arterioles themselves seem to sense the low oxygen and react.
We have to finish with the final mechanical challenge. We've talked about air, we've talked about blood, now we need to talk about water, specifically keeping the lungs dry.
The fluid dynamics. This is pure Guyton.
We said earlier that the lung is leaky because the pressure is low, but we need to quantify that.
We do. This brings us back to Guyton's favorite topic, Starling forces. It's an accounting ledger of pressures that determine if fluid moves out of or into a capillary.
On one side, we have forces pushing fluid OUT of the blood vessel and into the lung tissue.
That's the capillary hydrostatic pressure, which is very low, only about 7 mmHg. And the interstitial fluid pressure, which is actually negative, that vacuum we talked about, maybe next to 8 mmHg. And then there's the interstitial colloid osmotic pressure pulling fluid out, maybe 14 mmHg.
So that's a total outward force of 29 mmHg.
Right. 7 plus 8 plus 14 is 29. Now, what's holding it IN?
The colloid osmotic pressure of the blood plasma. The proteins in your blood albumin act like sponges. They hold onto the water.
And that pulls inward with a powerful force of about 28 mmHg.
So 29 out. 28.
And the math doesn't balance. There's a net filtration pressure of plus 1 mmHg pushing fluid out.
So we're constantly leaking.
We are. A slow, steady drip of fluid into the interstitial space of the lung.
So why don't we drown? Over the course of a day, that must add up.
The lymphatics again. The heroes of the story. They are the sump pump. They're constantly sucking up that plus 1 leak and dumping it back into the circulation. They keep the alveolar bone dry.
But Guyton talks about a safety factor. The system can handle a lot, but not everything.
Right. Look at the balance again. The main inward sponge force is the plasma colloid pressure of 28. The main outward pushing force is the capillary pressure of 7. You have a buffer. The capillary pressure has to rise all the way from 7 up past 28 before you get massive fluid leakage.
So there's a safety factor of about 21 millimilli Hg. Your blood pressure in the lung can triple, and you still stay dry.
Yes, but imagine a patient with acute left heart failure, a massive heart attack. The left ventricle stops pumping effectively.
Blood backs up.
It backs up into the left atrium, then into the pulmonary veins, then all the way back into the pulmonary capillaries. The hydrostatic pressure spikes.
If it goes over 28.
The dam breaks. The hydrostatic pressure overpowers the colloid osmotic pressure. Fluid floods the interstitium and then the alveoli. This is flash pulmonary edema. Yeah. It can be lethal in under 30 minutes. The safety factor is gone.
And here's the amazing adaptation story. What if the pressure rises slowly?
Like in a patient with chronic mitral stenosis. The mitral valve gets tight over years. The pressure in the left atrium, and thus the pulmonary capillaries, creeps up. 30, 35, 40 millimilli Hg.
That should be lethal based on the math.
It should be. But these patients are walking around, maybe a little short of breath, but they're not drowning.
How?
The lymphatic system adapts. Faced with this chronic high fluid load, the lymphatic vessels literally grow. They expand their capacity by up to 10 times. They become super pumps.
So the sump pump gets a bigger engine.
A much bigger engine. They can bail out the boat as fast as the water rushes in, keeping the patient alive at pressures that would kill a healthy person instantly.
The body rewires its own plumbing to survive.
It buys capacity. But again, it's a trade-off. Those patients are living on an even sharper razor's edge. If they get a pneumonia or some other stress, the pump can't keep up.
It's amazing. We started this hour talking about a simple, effortless breath, and we've uncovered this massive, unbelievably complex industrial complex operating underneath it.
It really is a perfect synthesis of structure, physics, chemistry, and biology.
Let's just recap the journey. We started with the architect Ganong.
The dichotomous branching tree. The transition from rigid cartilage to controllable smooth muscle, and the cleaning crew, the escalator, and the macrophages protecting that massive tennis court.
But then the mechanics of the pump.
The diaphragm creating the vacuum, the pleural fluid coupling the lung to the chest, and the law of Laplace. How surfactant is this miracle substance that saves us from collapsing every time we exhale.
And finally, the engineer Guyton.
The low pressure, high flow circulation. The zones of flow created by gravity. Smart plumbing with hypoxic vasoconstriction. And that delicate Starling balance that, with the help of the lymphatics, keeps the lungs dry against all odds.
You know, we talked about anatomic dead space at the very beginning. That 150 milliliter of air that doesn't do any gas exchange. We called it inefficient.
In pure gas exchange numbers, it is.
But I'm realizing, in physiology, inefficiency is usually just a misunderstanding of the goal. That dead space is the price we pay for conditioning the air. The low pressure is the price we pay for having membranes thin enough for diffusion.
Exactly. It's insurance. The system accepts certain apparent inefficiencies to ensure safety, robustness, and adaptability.
The lung yields. It yields to air, it yields to blood, but it knows exactly when and how to hold the line to protect itself.
Structure yielding without collapsing. That's the headline. That's the whole game.
If you want to see this in action, go open the books. Look at Ganong's pressure volume curves. Seeing the hysteresis loop really helps it click. And look at Guyton's own diagrams. Visualize that waterfall.
It changes how you see a patient. You don't just see breathing. You see the pressures, the compliance, the resistance. You see the engineering.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Next time, we are going to cross that 0.5 micron barrier. We're going to talk about what happens when oxygen actually meets hemoglobin.
Gas exchange and transport. My favorite topic.
See you then.